Come one, come all. This is Illiterate. My name is Evan.
My name is Taylor. I read a comic book this week.
I watched a series, a show, a new show on Netflix. We are covering Sweet Tooth. I am really excited to kind of uncover this today because this is a property I had never heard of before, not once. As far as I was concerned, this was like a wholly original thing, but nope. As we learn on this show, things come from somewhere.
Everything's based on something. Yeah. And what's interesting about what we're covering today, the comic that I went all the way through was dubbed when it first came out as Mad Max Meets Bambi, which lent it a much darker air a la Watchmen or The Boys, which we've covered both of those. Mm-hmm. The show is being lauded for its optimism and hope. Of course, it revolves around
a bit more Spielbergian, I would say, in its in its outlook.
Yeah, exactly. And so we'll cover all of that: comics, indie comics, the dystopian genre, and how does the guy Jeff who came up with the thing 10 years ago think about it?
Interesting about the genre here because, and they go out of their way in the first episode to kind of set up the audience for what this means. This is a post-apocalyptic type of thing, which I think got very, very popular through the mid-2000s.
Oh, yes.
But this is a new, it is trying to say something about the point in time, which is interesting. And it is the tagline, the end of our world is the beginning of his. And so it's very much like trying to remind you that there is a coming to a close of one world and an opening of another, but just a very interesting frame to put around a post-apocalyptic kind of world. I'm interested in I guess where this thing is drawing in that genre in particular, because it's certainly trying to look into a different direction here. It doesn't feel like it's stuck in 2010.
And Jeff Lemire acknowledges the lighter tone. He's the guy who wrote this. He worked with Jim Mickle, who was one of the co-showrunners, who sort of approached him and said, hey, we want to do this. Let me just remind you, on the literary side, The Road came out in 2006, along with World War Z. And then The Hunger Games in 2008, Maze Runner in 2009, Divergent in 2011.
Wow.
And then
Walking Dead blows up in 2010.
Yeah, shortly after.
So that along with the zombie genre just overran things throughout the 2010s.
It was the time of apocalyptic / dystopian stuff. So that's perhaps part of the reason also. Would we want this?
It's an interesting thing, post 9/11, I suppose, at least in our culture, that we would be so wrought to meditate on what the end of our society could look like for a good decade.
Yeah. Well, that led me. It's a good point bringing up like where these trends come from in history. What are there other pandemically inclined virus sweeps through pieces of literature or media historically that have any connection to this? So I looked into both apocalyptic and dystopian. The earliest surviving piece of literature that exists ever was involving an apocalypse.
What?
So you may have heard of this
before. It's the oldest story in the book.
Yeah. It's a group of stories, but it's the Epic of Gilgamesh, which maybe you've heard of that from the Babylonians. 2000 BC. But one of the stories from there is about the angry gods that send a flood to punish humanity, and there's an ancient hero who's saved through developing a giant boat, which then also becomes the biblical story. It's all through mythology, this great flood that wipes everybody out. But it's interesting because you're talking about post 9/11. It's really only after World War I did the Epic of Gilgamesh kind of reach a modern general audience.
Really?
Versus the literary kind of scene, from what I could tell.
That's very fascinating.
So it didn't hit the public consciousness until another cataclysmic world thing.
Yeah.
Speaking of those, I looked into sort of plague business as it relates to the end of times. The real post-apocalyptic pandemic thriller was by none other than Mary Shelley, who did Frankenstein.
No.
Yeah.
What was hers?
So this is called The Last Man, and it came out in 1826. It's set in the future Earth of 2073. to
Sick.
2100. The planet is being ravaged by a pandemic disease, some sort of virus. I also thought it was interesting because there's kind of, I don't know, climate things going on. There's storm surges that flood the coasts, and people have to move north to further climates because the plague is prominent in hot areas.
Oh, wow. I wonder where she was drawing those ideas from, because she's on to something, but I'm wondering what her inclination was at the time. That's amazing.
Well, it's interesting because like we were talking about with Jane Austen and then her doing Frankenstein and stuff, it's often a response within the Romantic period in which she lived. They're drawing on individuality, pushing away from the draconian laws before and the Age of Enlightenment. So it's sort of seeing the flaws of human nature.
Yeah.
Are humans the center of the universe, that kind of thing.
Right.
And then again, talking about how like timeline stuff, it was critically destroyed for the time when she wrote it. Nobody cared about it at all. And it didn't get reprinted until the 1960s.
Oh, wow.
Which is also kind of interesting. Again, another tumultuous time.
That's really interesting because you have to get through, Frankenstein's craze through early cinema, and you get all the way to the 60s before people are looking into her other work and deciding it's worth to publish again.
Yeah, I don't know. A lot of it did have to do with the politics of England of the time, and the characters revolve around being in government and whatnot, so maybe that culturally is not as applicable.
Interesting.
So it sort of got lost in the shuffle there. But yeah, that I thought was interesting as far as
incredible.
The firsts of early precursors of dystopian, which is like a civilization in tatters, and then apocalyptic, which is more the end of everything.
So hot right now.
So hot. Well, that leads us to, let's talk about the book. The first thing about it that you have to know, written and drawn by Jeff Lemire, which you hardly ever see with comics.
That's
He's doing both.
Incredibly rare. Yeah, that's never the case.
You can look at our episodes where we talk about Watchmen, where we talk about Stan Lee, where we talk about Justice League. But yeah, it's very, very rare. This was originally published by Vertigo, which was a DC Comics imprint. So it was like their kind of like FXX for Fox, where it was more adult content such as nudity, drug use, profanity, graphic violence.
Wow.
They changed the name to DC Black Label, but they
like Johnny Walker.
Yeah, exactly. So that's not what the show is at all. You wouldn't put it under the Netflix Black Label.
No,
showing.
This is straight up Spielberg, like E.T. I mean, it's apocalypse.
Yeah.
It's the apocalypse meets E.T.
Yeah, so it was a monthly series, so came out once a month from 2009 to 2013 in the height of all of this. 40 issues total. I read through them all. And then allegedly the first season of the Netflix show only goes through issue 12. So they still have 2/3.
Plenty of material to get through,
to go. And they expand, Where this comes from in this guy's mind, he was born and raised in a small farm town in Ontario and attended film school. And I thought this was wild. He pursued comics when 3rd, 4th year of film school. He's like, this just doesn't vibe with my personality and my creative impulses. He's a much more solitary person. And he has complete control, not only of the writing, but the visuals and the money. It's like, he's like, I have an idea. I just want to put it on something and it's done. And it's just him alone in his room drawing and writing it.
Yeah, film is so collaborative, and it changes because people bring so much. Everybody's talented in different areas. That's why there are these roles. But these projects can transform, and things come and go. And when you build a team, you're building your look of your show in so many ways. So it's very interesting that to see the flip of that, where it's like, no, I know what this is, and leave me alone for a little while, and then you can look at it.
Well, because it's as close as you can get
to filmmaking. It's a wildly collaborative process, and then you get this bouncing around a Warner Brothers boardroom, and I mean we'll hear about how it changed. We'll be interested to hear about his thoughts on how it changed. But as far as doing the comic, just having it alone, and he's got all control over it. I mean, it's pretty amazing. From the get-go, I was like flabbergasted that he drew it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what's cool, he's talking specifically, and there's tons of books that are written about comics and what the mediums do differently and whatnot, but it's this interesting merging where you're finding comics has that cinematic visual language, but then the individuality of like a novelist as close as you could get to it.
Yeah.
And then he's also saying what makes it unique, the freedom of it. Film's always one ratio. Some people do more than one, but it's a box, you know. Whereas in the box of a page, you can lay out panels so differently. You can bleed over into other things.
Yes, yes.
So that kind of goes into his style, which, like I said, I read all 40 of the issues. I can attest it's very cinematic. He uses every advantage that comic books has as far as laying things out and pacing things out and drawing things in different ways. His style is very scratchy, very harsh lines, but he did use a colorist for Sweet Tooth.
Oh,
so it is in full color, but it's not digital. He draws it all by hand on paper.
Oh my God.
And it's, like I said, just beautiful pacing.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
We almost just skated over that. I was like, okay, yeah, he does it all himself. And then, okay, he uses a colorist. Cool. But on a physical drawing. Oh, man, it's like we're back in the 90s. This is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all on his own, except for the color stuff. But what I did find was interesting in terms of being on his own or whatever. There's a whole sequence, which I won't spoil anything for the comic, for the show, whatever they're going to do, but it's in watercolor by another artist, maybe like issue 30 in. It goes into this backstory, 30 plus pages of just a completely different art style going back many, many years. And it was because he at this point had been hired by DC to work on other stuff, and he needed a break in those months to get it done. So he's also not averse to being like, I'm a curmudgeonly person who just wants to do it on my own.
Right.
Like I said, he has a colorist for this. And then when he needed something else, he's like, well, if I want to, this is completely deviating from the quote unquote, show of it. But I'm just going to get somebody else to do an entirely different tone and style and flow and everything. Jeez. But it fits in with the nature.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I can attest that I did tear up at the end. It was like beautifully complete. There was a quote that I saw that he said in relation to the adaptation that I thought was just wonderful, where he said, in the comic, the horror and sci-fi stuff is in your face and the heart sneaks up on you. And in the show, the heart and character stuff are up front and the horror is really sneaky.
Oh, yes. Yes. That's very interesting. I would say that's exactly how it feels because and this is rare, but my mom recommended this series to me. She got a few episodes in. She had a particular request. She was like, if you're gonna watch it, like go ahead of me and let me know what happens because she's like, she's
like, I don't want to.
She doesn't do well with suspense and horror anyway. So I can tell based on what she is telling me now, based on what you're telling me, like, oh, that makes a ton of sense because I saw the early episodes and it's very Spielbergian and optimistic and colorful and then I'm like trying to picture like, well, how does it get to the point where my mom can't watch it? And now and that quote really sums it up, and that's a very interesting thing to try to depict throughout episodes, throughout an arc, throughout 8 episodes,
Well, and even as they get later, if they do another season, which they probably will, and onward, it's like that's just story is conflict, and things can only go from bad to worse, and perhaps they will as they see, we have an audience for this, move things to that way. But I thought that was a very insightful thing from his standpoint of it's got both of those things. So it worked on me the way it worked on everybody who read the comics, where it's like you're in it for the comic, the bravado, the craziness, the violence.
Yeah.
But then by the end, you're like, oh, this is the classic grizzled person finding a kid. They both work on each other. One gets less naive. One has a heart of gold. The stuff that you just bring on the waterworks at the end here. I can attest that it does that, but it does it in a flip-flop way. So I just love that.
Yeah.
Let's get back to him, farm boy in Ontario.
Yeah.
He knows he wants to do comics, after college, but it does take him 10 years to get a publisher. He starts with self-publishing, but he's still working in restaurants around town.
Right.
And what really sets him off writing his own work is this thing called Essex County. And this is first published while he was working at a Mexican restaurant. 3 graphic novels. It ends up being a trilogy. It's massive. And it's basically about where he grew up in the farm country of Ontario. One of the books got bought and is set to be a TV show still in development.
Oh, interesting.
It's also nothing, it's usually stories set in cities and the city life and the hustle and bustle, and he's writing about farm country in Canada. Right. And again, with Sweet Tooth as well, this is the thematics that he likes to play with.
It's like all of the images, like I'm looking at images right now where it's like incredible mountain ranges and just lush like fields of grass and lakes and pretty it's pretty luscious. Where like it gets off the vibe where like the earth is taking, taking everything back.
And that's much more the show than the comic, because the comic is much more stark and the harsh lines and the scratchiness and whatever. And they definitely added that to the show, but the placement of it, they didn't change it to the city because that's, whatever they want to say thematically. But that's what puts him on the scene, is this Essex County. And I even found in 2011, Canada's CBC, their Battle of the Books, Essex County was the #1 People's Choice.
Oh, wow.
With more votes than all the other books combined.
Oh, my gosh.
So
a landslide.
If you're in Canada and you've read Essex County, please let us know.
How is it?
So from that, this put him on the map. He was able to get projects from, like I said, this DC imprint Vertigo. He only had 1-year contract to start, 12 issues, because monthly comics are dependent on sales. And he didn't know how long it would run. The way that he structured it is, okay, well, the first 12 can be their own thing. And if it doesn't go anymore, I'll know how to wrap it up if they give me the thing to say, well, it's not, and it won't be as fully fleshed out. But then once he was able to get the full 40, it became, I can add all this other stuff in the middle to flesh it out, and I can make the ending longer, and I can do what I want, what I intended. But he always knew A to Z what it was going to be, and that it would be final, the end. You and I talk about it off mic, but we love all the time when somebody's like, and it's not 9 seasons, maybe 10. It's no, this is what it gets to finally.
Get to the point. What's your point?
Yeah.
Sorry, that's just me. Don't waste my time.
Yeah. The influencers for this, the dystopian stuff we already mentioned, but comic book wise, Jack Kirby, always in our comic
just
foolishness,
popping up all over the.
He had a series that he did called Commandi in 1972. Initially, Jeff Lemire pitched the idea of doing a reinterpretation of it. It is a young boy in a post-apocalyptic thing. He was raised, and humans are ruled by an intelligent species of evolved animals that kind of have man-like proportions and physiques now after some crazy virus changed everything. God. So very similar.
Yeah.
That was definitely a big inspiration for him. And then another comic, Punisher, The End, by Garth Ennis. The character of Tommy Jeopard, he said very much based on Frank Castle from The Punisher.
Yeah.
And then from a personal standpoint, he had just had his son named Gus before starting the series, who was a few months old back in the mid-2000s. So then the main character is named Gus after his son, and he was thinking a lot about being a kid.
Yeah.
Finally, we get to what makes it different. Some minor stuff. Jeopard is a hockey player in the comic. He's not a football player.
Interesting.
And then Jeopard is white, not black in the comic.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah. Canadian hockey player.
Yeah.
Well.
That makes sense. But good on them for being open on this role, because I think I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Nonzo Ananzi. He's really good as Jeopard.
Yeah.
He's definitely makes you want to stick around after, by the end of the first episode. Yeah, very, very cool that they kept an open mind on that kind of thing, because I think that's paying off. I think he's really good in it.
Some of the bigger stuff in the comic is the violence, the tonal sort of brutality, and Lemire's take on this, Jeff, who wrote and drew it, as he's working on the adaptation side of it. He's saying with the violence in comics, there's a media difference where you can draw it with child characters around, and it's not as abrasive, but it's much more shocking and not appropriate with child actors and live action. It just doesn't work in the same way.
There's like a lot of laws around that too, about what, like, even like having like a child actor in, a child character involved in a very like a horrific death scene. Like there's a lot of stipulations around that piece of action being shot, and when the child can be privy, what shots they can actually be in, how they're comprised in that shot, in the foreground and the background, off to the side. It's a huge deal, actually.
It's a moral thing, yeah, I guess. But if you're drawing it, the audience can just absorb it.
You're just right there. But to do it actually and bring real people in the real world together and put it in front of a camera and lens it, it's like that. Now you're thinking insurance and what's the propagation of this, and wait, okay, did they see something that they shouldn't have seen, and what are the repercussions? And now the parents are involved. It can grow out of hand really, really, really quickly. So like anytime you see like a horror movie, if there's a child actor involved, you'll notice that those actors are not in the same shots with the bloody bodies, because they were never together on set.
Yeah, I wonder like that when we covered The Conjuring, like with the possessed kid and all.
Exactly,
I'm like, this, I don't.
There's to an extent with like monsters and makeup, that stuff is okay, but when you get down to real gruesome gore or nudity is really the hot topic. So
sure.
like even if nudity is not the focus of the scene, but it just becomes something that happens, like if you're in a killer chase or something and clothes get ripped off or something, that there you go. Now you have to watch about, well, okay, can the child character be in this shot? Because if that's going to happen, that's a legal thing. It's really interesting.
So that's kind of a big reason why they changed it. He worked with Jim Mickle and Beth Schwartz, who were co-showrunners, and they all agreed we need to find a new angle, a new visual language. And so the switch comes as, what would this world look like through Gus's eyes?
Right. Yeah.
That's where they're saying, it's a little bigger, it's a little brighter. Hence, New Zealand, and you're talking about the vast, epic, more vibrant landscapes. Yes. And then the lucky irony of it is they could continue shooting quicker because of the COVID New Zealand policies and how good they were about tamping it down.
Yeah.
And then his son, Gus, he can actually now share it with him. Because like I said, he was just born as he's working on the first issues of the comic, but now he's of age to where he can watch it with his son and be like, "Oh, I made that." And he said it walks the line of, it might be a little bit frightening to him, but he's like, when you can walk that line, you probably got it right.
Right.
For this age group. Because Goonies, E.T., like they're actually not, they're a little scary.
Oh yeah,
if you're 8 years old,
you can definitely get there. I mean, and I was a crazy kid. I was watching straight up R movies by 8 years old. But I agree. I think that I think that's why Spielberg had such an incredible career, is he was able to just thread that needle of that child-friendly adult action. Or horror, whatever it was in the moment, but he was able to thread it in a way that through the child lens. It's very interesting. I mean, that they are reframed this all through the point of view of Gus, which explains why the world feels and looks, and why the show feels and looks the way it does. And I think it's paying off for them because it looks different. It's not sold like it's not sold like a post-apocalyptic thing. He's not walking through the desert, with a shotgun. We have said so much about dystopian, post-apocalyptic, but it looks so much different than just about anything in that genre. And to see that these elements of what is so difficult about threading a needle that pushes up against scary, pushes up against uncomfortable. But it's exciting and it's beautiful, and you want to see what's going to happen next. There have this hopeful tinge to it. It's so hard to do. I mean, we've been trying to replicate it over and over and over again, basically.
And it has to fit in with the culture of it and what people want to see and what people are hankering for. This is after a cataclysm has happened. We're not out of the woods yet completely with coronavirus by any means, but
yeah. Now, and I'm watching it now, and I'm going like, well, I didn't know anything about the material because we're doing the show. I'm like, I know that there is a comic book. And so the inciting world building stuff here, if it was reading on screen, is like they're commenting about coronavirus. But I'm like, this is just coming out, and I know that this material existed a decade ago. What?
Yeah. And that's where it leads me. This is my last little story of this that I saw, which I think is the perfect capstone and changed some of my prejudices of adaptations and sequels and that sort of thing, which is very hard to get out of that of like, great, another thing, you know?
Yeah.
So this is about Jeff and sort of what changed him. So he knew there's this adaptation in the works, and he had said, kind of like with Jojo Rabbit, where it's like, well, that was my thing, this is their thing, great, versus boo hiss. So he said, I got to tell the story exactly how I wanted to tell it already. I don't have the desire to do it again. The comic will always be there.
Right.
Let's see what elements resonate with somebody else. And like you're saying, Gus's perspective and a new take on it and a more hopeful whatever, all of that stuff. He's like,
big motivated choices.
Perfect.
Good for me,
Yeah. So he said, I'd never thought I'd go back to the story. Remember, it was a monthly comic he wrote and drew every month for 3.5 years. Exhausting.
Yeah.
He's like, when I was done, I was done.
And, baby.
Like I said, I was really happy with the ending. He was really proud of the ending. He said,
so, what's left for you as a creative there? You're like, well, it's incredible. I did it, and but I can't do it anymore because, my God, you have to move on. And it's beautiful that he has I was worried at your first descriptions of him. It's like, oh no, is he really protective over these things and he doesn't like to work with others? And it doesn't sound like that's really the case at all. It just sounds like that he had the vision, and when somebody has it, let him run with it. But for that same person to then have the wherewithal to understand, it's like, okay, well, they're coming at it from a very different angle because it's going to be a very different thing. And that's irreplaceable. That's one of the most important things. I try to harp on that through these stories all the time. Is the self-awareness to understand how you fit into this and where it might be going and how valid what you do might be.
So he gives it to them, and this is the real cherry on the top here. Like I said, he's done. This is their thing. Let him make it. But he was on set for the pilot in New Zealand before coronavirus hit, and he's seeing hundreds of people all in love with it, trying to bring it to life. Not that he was necessarily jaded of it, but remember, this is almost a decade ago. It really makes him appreciate the creation of it, what the thing is, and sort of invigorates him in the right way. And again, this is me holding back my prejudices of not reinvigorating it the wrong way, where it's like, oh, this is going to make money. So he starts writing more Sweet Tooth stuff.
What?
It's called The Return, but the pandemic hits very shortly after. And so this is very uncertain times, and this is the thing that he's working on during the pandemic. And he even says he's like, having old friends in the form of the characters was comforting and a great thing.
Oh my gosh.
And he said, hopefully that comes through in the story. So crazy. This is a 6-issue standalone miniseries that came out in November of 2020. He added on to the story. And I got a copy of it, and I read the whole thing, and I won't say anything about it except that it is, and this is wild, set 300 years after the events of Sweet Tooth, which I won't say what happens in Sweet Tooth. I can't say anything more to that. It's a whole different twist on the story, and it was like one of those things where it's like, oh, I love this thing, teared up at the end, never thought you could add to it. He never thought you could add to it, but then this life situation happens, seeing the adaptation of his thing. And man, I like this completes it in a whole new way. And in a way, like, made me open to different storytelling where it's like, oh, here's this thing, here's an added on thing. Usually I hate the added on things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
I know exactly.
Usually
what
it's
you
like,
mean.
So I can't wait to see if they do this with the show.
Oh my God.
Because he did it because of the show, which is super fascinating.
That is crazy.
That added on
now
to
it's
it.
a wheel. It's a snake eating itself. It's inspiring itself.
Mm-hmm.
And that is bizarre.
I hate to like not be able to say anything about it because I want to see what they do with the show. But if you're interested, read the comics, read the additional one that he did in 2020, because you think, oh, that's the end and it's a beautiful end.
Right.
It fills itself out. It fills out the world. Why would you make more? But then the end, the actual end is like, oh, that really fills it out even more in a way that you didn't even think.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to say anything.
Which is, I know I'm speaking in abstract.
Sure,
but it's like,
and good.
I was just so jazzed.
We have talked about it before on this show, is that when a big property decides to do a follow-up, and often when there's two knee jerks, there's kind of the knee jerk to follow up the very minute. And then there is the second route that is always harder to stomach as an audience member, but I've come to highlight it as signatory of a motivated plot, is that when the story jumps a significant amount of time. The one that's coming to mind right now is Avatar. We talked about the Korra follow-up series. Follows up a significant amount of time later. And say what you want about
different
that
characters.
series. But it has a very particular reason as for why, has a motivated reason as for why, instead of just wanting to live with the characters in the moment and keep following them, it is now, it's taking you to a point in time to make a point. So you don't have to say anything to me when you say it's set 300 years in the future. I'm going, oh, they have a reason. That's what it says to me.
And that he was motivated to do it, motivated even more because of the emotions he was feeling during the pandemic.
Right. He's written this comic book a decade ago about the society coming to a close because of a pandemic. And then it goes away from his life and it goes off and becomes this thing. Now it's back in his life. And then what in the world happens? A real pandemic. And guess what is keeping him company?
And his son is 9.
His son is now the age of Gus in the show. And guess who is here to keep him company and re-inspiring this timeline of material? These characters is pretty bizarre. I thought this was completely over and done, but that's a really beautiful outlook on like where this could go. I'm so excited to hear that the follow-up sounds very motivated in terms of what it is, what it is there to do.
And it's done. You know what I mean? Like he did it.
It's
a
done.
6-issue thing. It's not another 40-issue thing.
Right.
It was a little thing.
That is so cool.
Yeah,
that is so cool. I had no inclination that there was any more of it, and certainly not that it would go off like that. So yeah, fascinating to see what
super cool
Netflix and Warner Brothers will do with this. It sounds like it has gotten such a warm response that it is a sure foot in for season 2. I'm sure they're already well underway making that. So we'll see what happens. That's really cool though about the follow up. Oh my god,
it's cool. Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I highly recommend to anyone, check out the comics because they are very different. The heart sneaks up on you. The horror is front and center.
Wow.
So if that's more your flavor.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Taylor. Thank you guys for listening along. Thank you guys. We could not do this without you. We love that you are here with us. Please let us know what you're watching. Let us know what you're interested in.
@IlliteratePod on Instagram.
Is there a show coming out that you're interested in? You never know when we will do an episode. And we will catch you next week.